Hello, literature class. This is Mrs. Grady, coming to you from quarantine. And this is the first day of your new quarter class. I'm feeling fine, so don't worry about me. But I do want you to have an idea of what you're going to be doing this quarter for literature class. So normally what I do on the first day of the quarter class is go through this little timeline of what we go through for each week of the class. So we'll go through that first, and then I'm going to give you an explanation of why I choose to teach this class as a mythology class instead of doing any other type of literature. So the objectives at the top of your page tell you what I'd like you to get out of this class. So the things that I'd like you to be able to understand or do by the time you're done are first to gain a greater understanding and appreciation of the role of mythology in literature and in everyday life. So mythology is something that a lot of our stories are based on. There are a lot of references in literature as you continue to study that are based in mythology, so it's good to have an idea and understanding of the origins of those stories and the stories that were told in Greek and other types of mythologies, so that you can see where those things come from in other stories. The second thing is to learn about the mythology of different world cultures so that you can see the similarities and differences in the stories of different groups of people. So we'll study 4 different cultures' mythologies throughout the course of this class. We'll start with the Greeks, and we'll go through Egyptian, Norse, and Native American mythology. You'll also give a presentation at the end that will cover the mythology of one of the cultures that we don't study together. And the last thing in the objectives is to explore the place mythology has in today's world. So that's going to be seeing how we have pop culture references in movies and TV and various things that tie back to mythology and are based in various types of classical mythology. Okay, so this first week, what you're going to be doing is you're going to be going through this introduction, and then you'll also be starting to read the Greek creation story with Mrs. Simons today. And you'll also start to go through the 12 Olympian gods. Now, we don't spend a ton of time with the Greek Olympians because most likely you've heard about those or studied those at least a little bit at some point in grade school. So consider this to be a refresher course or some things that you may not have studied in the past. And we'll go through the 12 Olympians and their characteristics and their stories, and you'll get an idea about who they are. Week 2, we'll study the Greek demigods and heroes. So those that will be Perseus, Hercules, Theseus, and Jason. And we'll study their stories. And I'll be back about midweek next week is what I understand. So we'll get to probably Hercules by that day. We usually do watch the Disney Hercules movie, so you can look forward to that. But it's very different from the mythology, as you'll see. Week 3, we'll go through Egyptian mythology. Egyptian mythology only takes about 1 week. Week 4, we'll start Norse mythology. Norse mythology will take us about 2 weeks. It'll probably take us 2 Thanksgiving break. By the time we get to Norse mythology is usually when I start having time in the computer lab to work on your final project. So that's why Norse mythology takes a little bit longer. So from November about 9th to Thanksgiving break, we'll be doing Norse mythology and starting your project. After Thanksgiving break, we'll start Native American mythology, and you'll continue to work on your final project. For those 2 weeks, we'll have kind of a mixture of a little bit of Native American mythology and a little bit of project work. And then that last week before Christmas break, we'll have your presentations, and it'll be the end of the quarter. So usually at the very end of the quarter, I don't give a final for this quarter class. Instead, your presentation is your final. So the last couple of days, we'll be watching Percy Jackson and the Olympians, the Lightning Thief, rather. It's not true to the story, as some of you might know, but the novel by Rick Riordan, but it's not awful, so we'll watch it. Some of you may disagree with me, and that's okay. So what you'll be graded on for this class, primarily you'll be given a grade for the notes that you take. Most days we'll be taking notes over a different story from mythology. They're fill-in-the-blank notes, as you'll see today, and those you will turn in as you complete them. I don't grade every single blank that you fill in, but I do check to see that you complete the notes. And then I'll usually choose a page from each set of notes to grade at random, so you have to make sure that you're filled in completely and accurately, and what you do on that given page will be your grade for that set of notes. It says weekly quizzes. We'll take a quiz or a test at the end of each type of mythology. There'll be 2 tests for Greek mythology, though I do give one over the Olympians and one over the Greek heroes. So 2 tests for Greek mythology, 1 for Egyptian, 1 for Norse, and 1 for Native American. So a total of 4 quizzes. 5 quizzes. And then your final project we'll talk about later. And that'll be the big grade for the class, and your final grade. It'll be described in more detail at a later time. Okay, the next thing we're going to look at is why I choose to teach this class as a mythology class. All right, well, what is mythology? Why do we study it? Mythology is the study of groups of people's stories. So the stories that they tell, that's what mythology is. And mythology is in our storytelling, it's in our, sorry, I'm going to make this full screen here. So mythology is part of our storytelling, it's part of our culture. It's referred to in various works of literature that you'll encounter later on. You'll see references to mythology on TV shows, in comic books, in movies. So it's everywhere, and it's just a matter of recognizing it. So myths are the purpose of a myth. The purpose of mythology is usually a reflection of the attempts of early people to answer the important questions in life, like who am I, what am I, where did I come from, why am I here, and the questions of nature. Why is the sky blue? Why is the sun in the sky? Where did it come from? Where did the earth come from? So when early people, without the benefit of revelation from God, were trying to answer those questions, they told stories. And a lot of times they got some things right, and they got a lot of things wrong. But it's more interesting to me to look at the things that they got right, even without God telling them directly, this is who I am, this is how I made the world, this is why the world works the way it does. Sometimes different cultures got close to the right answers, or had pieces of the right answer. And that's because God has infused himself into the world. And so just by sort of identifying the way that these cultures were able to kind of grasp what God is, or who God is, or how he created the world without him telling them, is really interesting. So this person is G.K. Chesterton. I won't read this whole quote, but the gist of it is that he was an important Catholic thinker from England, and he felt that if you didn't understand mythology, you didn't really understand people, because even the Greeks had an altar to an unknown god, but all of their gods were really not known to them. And the important part is that very last part of the quote. It is an attempt to reach the divine reality through the imagination alone. So mythology is really an attempt for all of these people to try to understand God and revelation and creation without the benefit of revelation from a prophet or from Christ or any of those things. Okay, so it's the biggest question I get. So it's not real. Why are we learning it? So yeah, we don't worship the Greek gods. We don't worship the Norse gods. We don't worship Egyptian gods. This isn't a theology or religion class. This is a story. This is a class that talks about stories. Mythology shows us that stories that we created, even without revelation, we're still able to sort of understand the things that are real. So the things that we would talk about in a religion class. So no, I'm not going to tell you that the Greek gods are like real and should be worshipped. Obviously, that would be against our religion. But what we're trying to understand is stories and how people tell stories and try to get to the realities of God just through their imagination. Doesn't mean that the Bible is just another myth or that biblical stories should be seen as just myths. These stories from mythology that we're studying came prior to Revelation. So before these cultures encountered Jesus, had people like apostles that came to talk to them about Jesus. This was them trying to figure things out kind of on their own. Okay, so partly we study mythology because a lot of words in our language come from mythology. There's a lot of times when we're going through the Greek gods and the heroes where I'll tell you, and that's where this word comes from. That word is from Greek mythology, or that word is from Norse mythology. So there's lots of the days of the week, and when we get to Norse mythology, are actually references to Norse gods. So those are things that we'll talk about when we go through the various parts of different cultures' mythologies. Lots of words in our language come from Greek mythology. Not so many from Egyptian, but a few ideas come from Egyptian mythology, and some things from Norse as well. So we'll talk about those things when we get to them. These are all pop up in literature, pop culture, full of allusions. It says remember those because we haven't actually gotten to that part of 8th grade English yet, but we'll get there. Allusions being a reference to something else that if you understand it, it helps you understand that thing better. Okay, so for example, in comic books, science fiction, and movies, there's lots of mythology that comes up in those. So the mighty Thor from the Avengers comes from Norse mythology, very different from actual Norse mythology, as we'll see, but that's where its basis is. Obviously, Percy Jackson, the books and the movie that wasn't well received, come from Greek mythology. There's a poster there for Gods of Egypt, which was a movie a few years ago, so reference to Egyptian mythology. Rick Riordan also wrote an Egyptian mythology-based series. Or Clash of the Titans was another movie, came out several years ago, and that one is also Greek mythology. So, comes up periodically in different situations. If you like certain popular TV shows, sometimes they'll reference mythology too. For example, if you've ever seen Supernatural, not recommending it, but there are references to mythology in that television show as well. Okay, maybe you're not a comic book, pop culture movie fan. Maybe you like sports because you're a sportsing person. Well, there's Greek mythology references in sports as well. For example, the Olympics, we'll find out where those came from while we study the Greek heroes. The Tennessee Titans are named after the Greek Titans, which you'll read about today. And the Nike company name comes from the goddess of victory from Greek mythology. Her name was Nike. That's where this name comes from. And the track winged shoe comes from the god Hermes. So there's references even in sports to Greek mythology. So maybe you thought you would never have to know about it or use it, and maybe you still feel that way. That's okay. Hopefully, maybe I'll change your mind, and if I don't, that's okay too. So that's why we study mythology. That's kind of the gist of everything. I say so thoughts. Of course, I can't interact with you today and hear your thoughts, but that is, in a nutshell, why I choose to teach this class as a mythology class. It's so that you have an understanding of the classic types of mythology, how stories work, where stories come from, and this will be beneficial as you continue to go through your education. It will be very helpful when you study the Odyssey with Mr. Rezach in high school, because you'll know a little bit about the Greek gods before you get there. All right, that concludes my little presentation here. So I hope that I will be back soon. I anticipate being back soon, and I'll look forward to actually being able to have class with you. And we'll see you later.